Hey there, we are again back with one more episode on our series of Hellenistic Astrology, and Lars has joined me again. Thank you, Lars, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, today we are going to talk about the 12 houses from Hellenistic Astrology point of view and what the Hellenistic astrologers over centuries have given it. So, let's start from. And we use Valens, as we already said, we use various Valens' work, which is translated by Mark Riley as base material, and I use that, and I also use Chris Brennan's book as another material, a major material as well. So that's the. So I think we should start now with.
Yeah. Sure. Do you want me to screen share?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. So what I have here is a chart designed by Chris Brennan. That's free on the internet. You can find this on one of his web pages and stuff. So he's made it free for people to use. And basically, we've got the name of the house on the outside. And then we've got some significations, right, on the inside, and then we've got the joys of the planets, which we'll talk about a little bit, because it's arguable that the joys of the planets are sort of what kind of create the houses or give life to the houses, and oftentimes Hellenistic astrologers will call the sixth house, for instance, will say the place of Mars. So they make this association quite often with the joys of the planets. And the houses are also called places, too, sometimes translated as places rather than house, for those of you who are new to this. And so we'll just talk a little bit about the houses and kind of give some additional commentary on them that aren't necessarily listed here. So the first house here is sometimes called the helm, and it's sometimes described as like the helm of a ship. And there's some nautical metaphors that sometimes make their way into some of the Hellenistic texts as well, which is cool. And it is considered to be the joy of Mercury. Now, what's interesting about the joys thing here is that basically you have the diurnal planets, Saturn, Jupiter, and Sun, above the horizon. And you have the nocturnal planets, Moon, Venus, and Mars, below the horizon. And then Mercury, who can be of either sect, depending on how he's placed, is in the first house. So he's below the horizon, but then he would rise above the horizon if metaphorically the horizon, he'll be rising above it. So the first house, Mercury, is kind of this analogy of, that it's sort of, that's where we're rising. That's where we're rising from below the horizon to above the horizon. So that gives some more, astronomically powerful metaphors to the first house. It's how we rise up and so on. So it basically denotes life, body, spirit, and all beginnings. And so we look at the ascendant, the sign on the ascendant, and the planet that rules that sign, and any planets in that sign, to give information or to get information about the basic character of the person, their basic health and the way they look, their body type, right? Their some of their facial features are described by it, and many things that are just generally important to who they are going to be described by the ascendant and all those factors I just listed. You don't look at Mercury necessarily. That these are the joys again are something that we may talk about later and maybe do another video on, but you look at the Lord of that sign. And it's interesting too, because there's some Hellenistic text that spirit, it's sort of it can be both like the life force, but also there are some texts that basically hint that the ascendant does have to do actually with the soul, not just the body. And later on, certain Persian astrologers started saying that the lord of the ascendant is actually symbolic of the soul, while the ascendant itself is symbolic of, the body consciousness. And so some of them would take the lord of the ascendant and the lord of the moon as in like what's behind these things. And so that would sort of be have to do with the soul. And a lot of people don't totally know that. And so I just find it very interesting that you do have some Hellenistic and medieval texts that talk about the ascendant and the ascendant lord in relationship to the soul, whereas you don't really, that sort of got lost at a certain point. And what's funny is that you actually see astrologers like in the modern era, like Dane Rudyard and Alice Bailey, emphasizing the ascendant and the importance of it for spiritual matters. So you sort of had a resurgence of that in modern astrology, and it has a relationship to this ancient system. So I always found that to be interesting. And so it's important to it's just the ascendant and the ascendant lord are so fundamental for all the rest of the chart, basically. And so that's where we have to begin. Did you want to say anything on that?
No, I think that's fine. You did just fine, sir.
Okay,
I don't. And there's one thing that a phrase that is given as hour marker. So hour marker is the point of ascendant, right?
Right, the exact point of the hour marking. And by and large in Hellenistic astrology, it seems like the most commonly used house system was whole sign, what we call whole sign today, which is that the entire sign that the ascendant is in becomes the first house. And then the entire sign that is the second sign becomes the entire second house, and so on. So there's less of a degree-based system going on here. There's not really necessarily even cusps. But we do see that for certain special techniques, Hellenistic astrologers would employ a cuspal system, but that is a conversation for another time. The basic symbology of the houses comes out of the whole sign analogy. And this is really important to understand because I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here and do an overview so that as we fill things in, it becomes more clear why the houses symbolize some of the things they symbolize. So first off is that we have basically, the signs that are in trine to the ascendant, which are going to be the 9th sign of God and the 5th sign of good fortune, right? These are the 120 degree aspect, the perfect triangle, which is a very stable, supportive shape geometrically and architecturally. You may notice how, for example, if you see like a beam of wood holding up a ceiling or attached to a wall, there may be like a little triangular, sort of structure, a little piece of wood that makes a triangle. Can't really do it with just my arm, but if you could imagine that there's that this is a triangle, so to speak, right? It basically provides stability. So the same in astrology, these three signs are in trine to one another. So naturally these houses become very, very supportive to the first house. And we find the same thing happening in Jyotish as well, where classically this is referred to as Lakshmi Sthana, which basically means that this triad refers to like abundance and fortune, because Lakshmi is the aspect of the Divine Mother that sort of like rules over what we call fortune. But it deals more with spiritual abundance and not just like lots of money or things like that. So Lakshmi rules over like true wealth, not just material wealth. And so we see a similar analogy happening here in Hellenistic astrology. We see that the 5th place is called good fortune and is the joy of the planet Venus. And we also see that the 9th house is the house of God, which is the joy of the sun. So we get kind of a curious triad here with the joys of Sun, Mercury, Venus. But it makes sense astronomically, actually, because if you think about it, Venus and Mercury are the two planets that can never get more than a certain number of degrees from the sun. They're always very close to the sun. They're always hanging out around the sun. And so we see that reflected here in this 9th house, 5th house triad. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and the Lakshmi Yoga stuff that you said is like people generally tend to relate it with wealth and materialistic aspects, but still the current portrayal of goddess Lakshmi has been given in such a way that she kind of pours wealth from her hands, like gold coins falling down. But still, that is just an imaginative perception or creativity that people have brought today. But it is not just real wealth or materialistic wealth, but it is all about being open to spiritual divination and which is the actual fortune.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and the triangle that you said, triangle again, it is the Trikona system that Vedic astrology has, and it is the same where that's the most, triangle is the most stable figure that a chart has. So both geometrically and astrologically, that makes real good sense.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so then the next thing to mention is basically the angles. So we have a division by 3, and then we're going to have a division by 4. But actually before that, we get a division of the circle by 2, right? Because the first house always implies the 7th house. And this is the simplest way to understand. The 7th house is others. It's marriage. It's our spouse. It's our competitors, like in a tournament or a competition. You look into the eyes of somebody else directly in front of you, and you'll experience the 7th house in astrology. And so this is also the place where the sun will set beneath the horizon. So it also has to do with old age and even death for Hellenistic astrologers. And it is not a bad house, but it is sort of a neutral house. It is a strong house because all 4 angles astronomically are related to points of culmination in a planet's daily rotation around the Earth, which is not the planet's rotation, but it's rather the Earth's turning and the sky, turning in a 124-hour period. So the culminating angle is kind of, the 10th house is sort of the natural place where the midheaven is, supposed to fall, but the midheaven doesn't always fall in the 10th whole sign house. And we'll talk about that later. But for right now, we can think of it as the midheaven, which is the point where in its diurnal arc across the sky, because of the Earth's primary motion, which is the Earth's spinning. Basically what happens is the midheaven, 10th house, is the point where the planet reaches its like greatest potential. Its highest position, but its highest point in the arc, right? And then it starts to set after that. So that's what that is. And the opposite is the subterranean angle, right? Which is the same thing, but on its semi-arc when we can't see it, right? On the other side of the Earth where other people will be seeing it for their daytime or whatever. So the 4 angles are places of intense activity. The trines are places of great support. But the 4 angles are just places of activity, action. It's the turning of the wheel, the 4 spokes of a wheel, the 4 parts of the 4, points in the year, the solstices and the equinoxes. It's like those. And so therefore, basically, these are more neutral places that signify action. And so because of that, planets placed there and planets ruling those places naturally signify stuff that is like very prominent in the person's life. There's a lot of activity around it, and it's more neutral. In Jyotish, it's I think it's sometimes referred to as Vishnu Sthana.
You mean the 9th house?
Like? No, the 4 angles. Isn't it related
angles?
To Vishnu?
Angles, Vishnu Sthana. It is given in some texts, but they are considered as generally the pillars of the chart.
Right.
And what happens is the 4 houses, as it is, they signify a turning point in the chart itself. So the first house and the fourth house is kind of self kind of thing, and from fifth house it just shifts away to a little bit of away from us, like mother, and then it is mother is nourishment, and then you go on to children and then spouse. So from then on it shifts away, which is outside our family, it's like public, and then from the 9th to 12th it is like foreign land, something far away. So each and every like square is a kind of turning point in itself when it comes to like angles that we are speaking, and the angles actually add strength to the chart. Like if you have planets like planets in all the four angles, your chart is considered to be like you can come up in your life, a native can come up in his own life without others' help or something like that. So basically it is a basement to the chart, and it adds value to our kind of life, to what we are doing and how we are doing. So trine gives fortune, and the square gives the strength
and activity and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And so the angles are called kentron in Greek, which is the arguably the origin of the word kendra in Sanskrit. And so kentron basically means like prodding or goading into action. And so this idea that these four angles are places where things are prodded or goaded to do something. So it's always good to keep in mind the astronomy with this stuff, because it does form so much of the foundation of the muse and whatnot. And in Jyotish, in Parashara's text, there's like a special set of configurations called yogas given for each ascendant. And I just wanted to bring this up really briefly, because, like Parashara will say that when benefics rule an angle, like if you had a Pisces rising, Jupiter would rule two angles, that basically when benefics rule these angles only, they become less benefic in a sense, according to this methodology. And the idea is relatable to Hellenistic astrology again, because even though the Hellenistic astrologers didn't say that, they did again, give this idea of the four angles as being just places of activity, and so they have a neutral kind of vibe to them, and so that's why Parashara says like Jupiter's not quite as benefic when he only rules angles, because the angles are not naturally benefic houses. They're just strong, basically. They're just powerful. And they're good places. They're in the sense of they are places that witness the ascendant, right? Because it's 90 degrees. And this is related to the aspect doctrine, where basically any houses or places that are 60, 90, 120, or 180 degrees, they see one another. It's like two people seeing one another. And so in a moment we'll describe the dark houses and explain how they don't see one another, but the point being is that the angles are more neutral, but they are also places that are quote unquote conducive to business, or they are active places in the chart that there's light there. They're not dark. So by extension, they're sort of good. Anyway, I'm kind of getting on a bit of a tangent.
There is something. No, there is an astrogeometrical relationship that plays from the ascendant with the square houses and the trine houses, which necessarily doesn't happen with the 6, 8, 12. But I just wanted to go back to what you said about the 7th house death, and also the 8th house death, which is given in this particular figure. But I think most of the ancient astrologers have associated death with the 7th house, and death with 8th house is more of a modern concept. I don't know from where it came.
You do find it in some of the Hellenistic texts, actually, and whatnot, and in Persian texts and stuff. So, yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit. It's kind of a strange and complex topic, but I have a theory on it. I guess the final thing I'll say with regard to the four angles, houses 1, 10, 7, and 4, before we come back to it and do the actual significations, because we're just doing a general thing now, is that the perfect square is a very unstable geometric shape, and therefore, there's a lot of activity happening. So again, it's geometrical, it's astronomical, so on. So moving on, I'm going to talk about actually, just these two other houses before I get to the dark houses. And so the two other houses that are important to understand are the house of the good spirit and the house of the goddess. These are the houses that are sextile to the ascendant. And these are considered to be benefic houses in this system. And they are related by the sextile, which is a sixfold division of the circle, which yields a honeycomb shape, which is actually also a very stable and spiritually uplifting shape geometrically. It's obviously the shape that beehives are made out of, and so on. And there's like a whole thing around honeycomb shapes being like uplifting and that sort of thing in, I guess you could say, sacred geometry. But yeah, let's just take a look at it real quick. We've got Jupiter joys in the 11th house of good spirit. And so this house is associated with basically all gains and good things generally, friends that support you, but also, of course, the good spirit, which is a concept in the ancient Hellenistic world that you had, it's where the angel devil on your shoulder trope comes from. You have the good spirit and the bad spirit, and the good spirit advises you towards like honesty and integrity and truth, and the bad spirit tempts you away from those things. So this is the house of Jupiter, and Jupiter house is in contrast to Venus, which is the house of good fortune, right? So this is the 11th house is a more impersonal goodness and support, whereas the 5th house is a more personal, individual kind of support, more subjective. And then in contrast to the house of God, which is the sun, we have the house of the goddess, which is the 3rd house, the joy of the moon. So sun is God, moon is goddess. It's similar to saying something like Vishnu and Lakshmi, or Shiva and Gauri, and so on. It's that kind of idea. And, and so basically, these houses just take their significations from the fact that they are sextile to the ascendant. And the house of good spirit, like the 5th house of good fortune, these are both succedent, which I think in Greek is panaphora, if I remember correctly. And basically, the succedent houses are about 50% as strong as the angles, which are the strongest, because these houses are about to rise, right? So this is culminating, and it's moving this way. It's as my mouse moves, it's moving that way, right? So once this finishes culminating, this is going to culminate. And same here, this is going to anti-culminate down here. And same with the 2nd and the 8th house. They will culminate as the primary motion of the earth turning 24 hours a day shifts. So the good spirit is quite, more powerful than the 3rd house also traditionally, which is considered to be mildly malefic by certain Hellenistic astrologers, and by many Indian texts, it's considered to be sort of like a mildly malefic house. And I think it's simply because it's cadent. And I didn't say this yet, but the cadent houses, with the exception of really the 9th, are all difficult because they are receding from the angle. They have already culminated and they are falling away. And in Greek, they're called apoklima, which is actually the same thing they're called in Jyoti. Yeah, right. So I forget exactly what that means, but I know that cadent means falling away. So they have this notion of falling. And really the 9th house is cadent, but it sort of is an exception because it just ends up being so auspicious in terms of its support, the triangle I talked about. So did you want to add anything about those two houses, Aswin?
No, you can just move on. I just have something to say about the 7, 8 house death, and that I think we need to just go like.
Let's wait to talk about that.
No, yeah, and there is another thing here. Astrology is 8th house in here Vedic, but it is 9th house in Hellenistic. So there are a little bit of differences we can see.
Yes, and I'll explain that too, or at least my thoughts about it. Hopefully, it'll be helpful. So then finally, we get to like the last set of houses, which are the most difficult. We've got houses 2 and 8, which are succedent, which are actually quite strong from a strength perspective, but very, very considered very malefic by Hellenistic astrology. And then we have the 6th house and the 12th house, which are cadent and considered also very malefic, because they're both very weak astronomically, but they're also malefic houses. And these are all malefic houses because if we use whole sign houses, the sign on the ascendant does not witness these 4 houses by a regular aspect, by the regular polygon sort of aspects we mentioned earlier. Because if these 2 houses were to witness one another 30 degrees apart, it wouldn't make sense, because why would you have 2 different signs at that point? Yeah. And then, right, the 6th and the 8th are actually 150 degrees from the ascendant, and they don't form a regular polygon. You cannot divide the circle by 150 and get an even polygon that's like nice and easy to work with. So these houses all take their malefic nature from this fact, and that is something that falls apart if you use quadrant-based divisions, because you no longer have a situation in which you may no longer have a situation in which the 8th house, for example, is 8 signs away and in 150 degree aspect. You might have the 9th sign as the 8th house, for example. Conversation for another time, but it's important to understand that. So the 2nd house is called the gate of Hades, and the 8th house is called the inactive place, sometimes also the idle place too. The 12th is bad spirit, which is the contrast to good spirit, and the 6th is bad fortune in contrast to good fortune. 6th is ruled by Mars in contrast to Venus. 12th is naturally associated to Saturn in contrast to Jupiter. And of course, then the malefic planets oppose one another in this scheme of joys. So basically, even though the gate of Hades deals with like livelihood and possessions and things that generally support the person, you know, food and stuff too, it's a malefic house because it's like, just because it's dark and it opposes the 8th house. And it is, I'm not really sure why it's called the gate of Hades, to be honest. Like, I don't fully understand this concept. And maybe at some point I'll understand it and we'll make a video on it. But that has never really been clear to me. But what has been clear to me is the fact that like having to survive in life, no matter what era you're living in, is a challenge. It's difficult. It's something that we'd rather not have to do. We'd rather not have to worry about money and like feed our bodies and take care of our possessions and stuff like that. It's a pain in the ass. So the 2nd house is kind of malefic in that sense. And oftentimes when planets are placed here, you'll actually find that they are somewhat problematic if you analyze them properly, because they don't witness the ascendant. And so they don't really add any support to the life, the body, the spirit, you know. The 12th house is receding from the angle, right? It's already risen. It's risen after the helm. So it's what's already come before. So it deals with stuff that was before your birth, but it also generally deals with all of these things. And I think we'll leave that to when we talk about each house a little bit more specifically in a moment or whatever. But yeah, and then the 8th house is interesting because it is about to set after this house. So it's like, I think it became associated with death because it was setting, you know, it was about to set. It's where things really start to change and set and so on. And then the house of bad fortune, you know, injuries and sickness and slaves and stuff. Again, it's just a cadent it's a cadent house to one of the angles here, and it doesn't witness the ascendant. So it became associated naturally with these things, sort of just as a result of it being not witnessing the ascendant, being a dark place, and then also being cadent. And of course the system of the joys. So that's kind of our very basic overview of the houses and why they mean what they mean. And in a moment here, I think we should get into some of the more specific meanings of each house.
Yeah, sure.
So if you want to comment on that.
No, I think you kind of threw like very good light in terms of analyzing the geometrical relationship that an astrological chart has. And the other most important thing is that when you have a wheel chart, it is even more easier to understand the geometry of it, because the square chart kind of you can just analyze from a what do you call, just from a layman point of view. We can just draw scales and note that this sign is not entirely kind of related to this house or this house. So, but here it is easier to understand, where we can easily see that if I'm the first house, I cannot really see those two people near me.
Right next to you, yeah.
So it is easier for me to view someone sitting just at about 90 degrees angle or something like that. And likewise, it also becomes easier for me to look at 90 degrees from this side and 120 degrees and so on. So,
yes.
So that's how it goes. So, and more than that, it doesn't have the light of the hour marker, and that is even more important to understand why the 8th house and the 6, 8, and 12 fall as dark houses. So,
yeah. And for those who want to understand more about this concept, I recommend looking at the Timaeus by Plato. It's his final text that he wrote. And it's one of his most esoteric texts, where he mentions like Atlantis and talks a little bit about, I think, even chakras and stuff like that too. But Plato also talks about optics in that. And so Plato's theory of optics is about that there's like a light that comes out of the eyes that harmonizes with the light of the world. So if you understand that, then metaphorically, as you were just saying, Aswin, like it's almost like these 4 houses don't get the light of the ascendant or the eyes. They're places where we don't see. So it's actually a very profound way to understand the chart, because it can help us interpret things spiritually and psychologically as well, not just purely predictively and fatalistically. These are places, when you look at a chart, that the person is not going to be as aware of. So they may be areas that are creating troubles for a person because he or she doesn't naturally understand them or is not naturally familiar with them, and so on, if that makes sense. Although that's a little bit reductionistic, because there are, of course, exceptions to that rule, especially when you get into the nodes and stuff. But in any case, let's just talk about each house kind of individually for a moment.
Sure.
And and hopefully we won't get too lost. So we already talked about the ascendant, right? And so when you interpret a chart, you want to look at where the ascendant lord falls in any of the other houses and know that the person is going to be that's going to be a huge theme in the person's life. So if the ascendant lord is in the 7th house, you know that marriage and living abroad and some other things that aren't listed here are going to be really important. And I think I'm going to get off of this chart now, because there's a lot of things that these houses mean that really aren't listed here, and I don't want us to get too caught up in what's written here, because it's a very incomplete overview. So I'm going to switch over to the Valens text. And I won't be like reading directly from it too much, but it'll just sort of be here in the background as we talk, I guess, and we can like reference it if we want. But so we've already talked about that with the ascendant and whatnot. So yeah, let's like move on to the 2nd house a bit, if I can find it here, because the houses are not exactly in order. But the 2nd place, called the Gate of Hades, the place rising after the ascendant. So as you can see, like right off the bat, benefics do no good, and the malefics make men sluggish, unable to wade through their lives in the end. So kind of a negative association that he gives there. But just generally speaking, it is the house that deals with money and possessions and survival and basic responsibilities. And in Jyotish, we find that it also symbolizes the family very generally, which is not something we find in Hellenistic astrology, but I personally always use that. I always borrow that from Jyotish because I think it makes sense, right? What supports your body when you're a little baby, when you're a little kid, right? Your family members. They're supporting you, they're feeding you, they're providing you with money and the things you need to survive. So it makes a lot of sense, and I think it works in a Hellenistic context personally.
So I think, Lars, can we just talk about the like opposite houses, like 1 and 7 and then 2 and 8? Will that make sense?
Oh, you want to do it that way? Sure, yeah. So
in terms of relating, I think that will be more easier so that we can also explore the two sides of the horizon with a more enlightened discussion. Yeah.
So yeah, let's let's talk about the 2 and 8, and then we'll go back to 1 and 7 then.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, the second house is opposite the 8th house, which is considered to be one of the more difficult parts of the chart. I think for the Hellenistic authors, the 12th house is probably the most challenging, generally speaking, but the 8th place of death, it does similar things that we saw briefly where he's talking about the second. Benefics become weak, and if they rule the ascendant or the lot of fortune, they are even more ineffectual and variable. And if malefics are here and rule those things, right, the native is a vagrant, losing whatever he may have gained. So the 8th house very much has to do with the Hellenistic authors, like radical changes, like crises, debilitating scenarios, like a chronic ailment, a chronic disease. It has to do with the unknown for sure, it seems like, and it is just sort of generally a place of misfortune, and it can be used to predict death as well. With certain special techniques. And in Jyotish, it also becomes the house of longevity, which I think makes sense, again, even though that's not part of the Hellenistic tradition. It's a good thing to keep in mind, because if it has to do with death, naturally it has to do with longevity. That's obvious, because how long you're going to live determines when you're going to die. So a strong 8th house is useful for, if you have a strong 2nd house and a strong 8th house, it is good for longevity. It is good for avoiding really difficult situations, and it is good for surviving and things like that. But but especially the 8th house creates its own set of problems and whatnot. And again, if we think about the 2nd house as like possessions and, let's say, like eating food, then the house opposite the 8th is going to be the opposite of those things. So like the digestion and expulsion of food, so the bathroom and going to the bathroom, and the loss of possessions or other people's possessions and money, because it's the 2nd from the 7th house, which is other people or the spouse, right? So there are actually plenty of good things that both these houses can symbolize, but they do tend to create challenges.
Yeah. So the 2 and 8th house axis is it is kind of each and every opposite houses are exactly opposite from each other. Like 2nd house is our own money, and the 8th house is other people's money, and 2nd house is regular income, while the 8th house is irregular income, and 2nd house is our possession, while the 8th house is insurance or acquired possession, not acquired but still like got through something, or I think insurance is the right word. So that's how we can easily define the opposite houses, which lie in exactly different poles.
Right, right. Yeah, so pretty simple to understand, I think. So I guess now we'll jump back to the first seventh house dichotomy. Have the seventh house here, and it's generally actually considered a pretty good house overall. Like I said, benefics in this place and ruling the ascendant or the lot of fortune indicate good things for the native: inheritances, sudden acquisition of others' property, and benefits from death. And you're going to notice too that, like, if you read this, Valens says the planet ruling the ascendant or the lot of fortune, and that's because the lot of fortune, which we haven't talked about yet, is kind of like a second ascendant. So it is rather important to consider. And you can start by just seeing where the planet is placed that rules the lot of fortune, but just using the houses normally, like from the ascendant, from the sign on the ascendant. Because there are other ways of doing houses in Hellenistic astrology, but that's more advanced. So we won't talk about it much here. So just to keep that in mind, and so, we see other things like, let's see, something about gaining things in old age and being entrusted with cities and the affairs of kings. If the malefics are here and ruling the lot or the ascendant, the native's life is subject to ups and downs, but especially in old age, again, because it's the end of the sun's path across the sky. It's nighttime, and so, I mean, what Valens gives here is kind of like more like general stuff in terms of how planets behave in the house, but he's not giving as much in terms of just the general significations. And so, that's what we really want to understand, is like the seventh house is the other. It's whatever polarizes our own individual being. And so it is opponents. It is not enemies. It is not people that are trying to destroy you. It is opponents, people that may be competing against you in a competition type setting. It later on became enemies, but in Hellenistic astrology, the sixth house is enemies, the kinds that are trying to destroy you. So seventh house is also the marriage partner, the spouse. It is business partners, and it is foreign places, right? Because it is what's over there, right? It is something out that we head towards. And we also find many of these same things in Jyotish. And it can be used to delineate disease and death as well. And I know that's one of the things it's used for in Jyotish rather than the eighth house. But, I don't know. I'm typically less familiar with that perspective. I typically use the eighth house I did a lot of work on predicting death at one point because I had a morbid fascination about it, and I would mostly use the eighth house. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Seventh house kind of, I think it signifies death because that is the final place where the descendant falls, and from then on, again, the next horizon starts from the eighth house, which is why eighth house is called as the house of transformation or rebirth. So I think that also kind of makes philosophical sense in terms of understanding why seventh house is death and eighth house is transformation. But I've seen, like, we cannot really argue that eighth house is not death. So
yeah, it's really transformative situations. If the ascendant lord is in the eighth, you can expect that the person will have many breaks and changes throughout their life, which is not good or bad. It's just how it is. They'll be involved. They'll be drawn into circumstances that are disruptive and that cause them to think more deeply about life. They may be obsessed with death. They may be fascinated by death, fascinated by the unknown. And I think that's why the eighth house, especially in today's age, is more associated with astrology than the ninth. And I think, we should talk about that more when we get to the ninth house. But yeah, this idea that astrology allows us to look into the occult what's
Hidden
hidden.
matters.
Occult means hidden, and the 8th house is anything hidden. It really is. It's the 8th and the 4th house both deal with hidden things, and the 12th too. 8th, 4th, and
Yeah,
12th very much deal with hidden things.
the
And
moksha houses.
yeah, in Vedic astrology, the moksha houses, and 8th and 4th in particular, if a person has a strong configuration between 8th and 4th, they are likely to inherit money when somebody dies, or inherit property or something like this. So a friend of mine had Saturn in Aquarius in the 8th and Jupiter in Libra in the 4th, and they inherited quite a lot of money from their grandmother when she died. So these are the types of things you can look for as well, because they do have to do with money and inheritance. And the second house, I don't know, the second house is interesting because the second house is less likely to signify breaks and changes and more likely to signify just a person who becomes like either overwhelmed or kind of idle or lazy about things. Like an afflicted second house can often show a person who has eating disorders or drug addiction problems, whereas an afflicted 8th house or something like that will show a person who tends to have more, their problems are less related to something material like that. They're going to be more, they might be more psychological, and they're related, of course. Like a person has a eating problem or a drug problem because they have a psychological problem. But I guess my point is that it's like two ends of a spectrum. And so the 8th house seems to be more related to, having inner turmoil, where the second house is more external turmoil, starving your body or poisoning your body. Whereas the 8th might be, like poisoning your mind or like emotional traumas that you hold on to and things like that. So.
Sure.
Okay, third place?
Yeah, 3rd and 9th.
3rd and 9th. So here we have the 3rd, the place of the goddess, the joy of the moon. Blah, blah, blah. The native will be a great and a master of many good things if the moon is in this place and rules the ascendant or the lot. He will rule a city, give many orders. It will be a priest or priestess of great gods. So there's a religious association. And this is very much actually, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but this is stuff that's very in line with Jyotish. Like Parashara says of the 3rd house that it also signifies Upadesha, which is initiatory instructions. So initiatory instructions into some sort of yoga or ritual or religious path. And the Persian astrologers who continued this tradition were studying, they associated the 3rd house in a night chart more with the person's religion and faith. And they said it signified religions that aren't as powerful or well-known or like, if, for example, if the main religion of a country is Christianity, then that would be a 9th house thing. But then the 3rd house religions would be like, religions that are just less common. So if the main religion is Christianity, but the person is like a Muslim or a Hindu or something like that, that might be more of a 3rd house thing. But generally speaking, the 3rd house very much has to do with how we relate to teachings personally, and how we make the divine gifts and wisdom of the 9th, like come into our daily everyday life. So the 3rd house also signifies stuff around daily life, travel, because the moon is naturally the planet that just it travels very quickly. So it's a travel house. It is also denoting siblings. And generally speaking, it also extends to like cousins and sort of extended family, like as a general thing. So like it can show aunts, uncles, cousins, and siblings. It can show peer groups that you like go to school with, or coworkers, or neighbors as well. So people that are just kind of in your general environment, but not necessarily like as immediately in your sphere. And so even though you wouldn't look at it to see like a specific uncle or aunt or a specific cousin, you would look at, there's a way to do that, but it just shows those things generally. So it can signify like extended family. and whatnot. And so it kind of has a lot of significations around that. And in Indian astrology, it's also associated with efforts and leisure and entertainments and stuff, which I think makes sense in terms of the Hellenistic conception. I think it's not we don't see those things as much in Hellenistic, but it works, because if you think about the fact that the third house is Caden, it's going to require more efforts. The moon is our appetites and what catches our attention. So, we like to engage in like leisurely activities and play and just kind of like entertainment, with the moon joining there. And yeah, so I think that stuff also makes sense if you want to practice Hellenistic astrology, you can use some of those meanings from the Indian system, but they're not explicitly listed by Hellenistic authors.
Okay. Yeah. There is also one more thing that Indian astrology lists in the second house, which is the house of younger siblings, and for
the third house. For the third house.
Yeah. The third house
for younger siblings.
Yes, it's for the younger siblings, and the 11th house. Right? 11th house is for the elder siblings, but we'll get back to that when we move into the 11th house stuff. But third house is also the house of courage. It's the house of music. It's the house of initiative. And the house of music is kind of, we can easily relate to that because moon rejoices in the second house. Yeah. So, and it's the house of courage and initiative. And it is the house of authority, the house of leadership and stuff when we speak from psychological point of view. So yeah, pretty much.
Interesting. Yeah, and again, it's opposite. It's the goddess.
Yeah.
It's the wife of the god, or the wife of the emperor, because the ninth also denotes, the ninth is going to denote emperors, switching over to the ninth, and the divine, because in the ancient world here you had emperor, these emperor gods or god emperors. So it wasn't the 10th house that ruled kings, it was the 9th house. And I personally think that makes a lot more sense. And so even though in the later medieval tradition, the 10th house became the house of the king, I think it should be the 9th house personally.
And 9th house is the house of father.
9th house is father in Jyoti, but in Hellenistic, it's actually the 4th house more commonly. A strange kind of difference that we have, but I think it has more to do with how those cultures looked at the father and looked at the houses, of course, too. But of course, in Hellenistic astrology, I think they would give a lot more attention to the lots than the houses. So you'd look at the lot of the father, and that would be more important than the 4th house anyway. So, but we can talk about that later. This is like a very good house in general. If benefics happen to be in this place and have been assigned as ruler of the ascendant or the lot of fortune, the native will be blessed, reverent, a prophet of the great God. In fact, he will be obeyed like a god. If benefics are not there, and if Mercury alone is in aspect or ruling or whatever, the native will be involved in soothsaying, and he will expound his craft to the masses. And so this is kind of where the association of astrology comes, because astrology was seen more as like as a form of soothsaying and divination, and astrology was also something that was very much like from God, and it was something that you utilized in the service usually of emperors and kings and people like that. So I think it became associated with the 9th because it was this prophetic kind of thing, and prophecy and stuff comes from God. So I think that it later for us today is more associated with the 8th because the 8th house is the 12th from the 9th. So it's going away from God, so to speak. And it is therefore a place of taboo stuff, because the ninth is not just God. It's also like, according to Firmicus Maternus, it also has to do with like social status in a sense. And this is also a very very much in common with the Indian astrology too, like this
Yeah,
this
respect.
dharma, right? So like what you need to do to be an upright citizen and model citizen. So the eighth sort of takes us away from that because it's the 12th from the ninth. But the eighth is, but astrology now in today's world especially is, it's not, maybe it's not like this in India, but at least in the West, it's still not really accepted as a ninth house thing. It's not really, it's not given, it's considered taboo. It's considered underground. It's considered stupid still by many people, you know? So that's kind of my thought on maybe why it might be better associated with the eighth today. But there's also this, again, this sense of the eighth having to do with the unknown and the occult dimensions. And so you really, you have to be able to access that occult level to really do good astrology. So it's kind of a strange, like it's hard to see where it fits. Does it fit better in today's age in the ninth, like the Hellenistics say, or in the eighth? I mean, I don't really know, because like in my chart, I have Ascendant Lord Mercury in the eighth house, and obviously I'm like obsessed with astrology and divination, and I don't have anything in the ninth, and my ninth lord is, you know, not in the best condition. So my chart says, you know, it's more the eighth house, but I'm not totally sure. What do you think?
I think, as we already spoke, eighth house is the house of transformation, and ninth house kind of, it's the next to eighth. So there we have like, only if you transform you can enter into the spiritual realm or spiritual zone. So it's you need to get into the transformative mode. You need to accept what's coming your way, or what lies ahead before entering the zone of spirituality or understanding greater truth. So I think there is a relationship between the eighth and ninth house because it's next to next. So so there is that kind of a peculiar relationship, or like kind of thing that we can form by ourselves in order to understand it better. So I think eighth house is the first step to actually reach the ninth house stuff.
Yeah.
So eighth house is kind of hidden divination, or what it is like the spider zone where Frodo Baggins gets in the Lord of the Rings, and
Yes.
When he comes out, it is an entirely different thing. So that is a ninth house thing. So, but eighth house thing can be a bit difficult, but the road might be hard, but still the result.
And it's interesting too, because I mean, Parashara does say that if a person has the Lagna Lord in the eighth house, that he will, you know, he says things like he'll be angry and prone to fighting, but that he'll also have some sacred knowledge.
Yeah, sure.
Right, because he'll have some hidden knowledge. And actually, in Jyotish, you know, if we borrow from Jyotish, we can better understand the houses, because the third house is the eighth from the eighth. And so the third house is kind of like a secondary eighth house, and it signifies initiatory instructions, and it signifies, you know, certain types of religious stuff according to Valens. So there is this notion of like a hiddenness to the third and the eighth house, and hidden knowledge and hidden understanding. But I think that the ninth house maybe rules over astrology as a prophetic art, you know, like if you're doing astrology, maybe more like a naughty leaf reader would be doing it. That may be more of a ninth house thing because it's prophetic. You know, it's coming from the divine. Whereas the eighth house is more like the, you know, doing the astrology, like learning it, like doing it in a way that is starting to get you in touch with that stuff, the occult and whatnot. But the ninth is like that full blown, okay, I received a vision of your future while I was looking at the chart.
Sure.
And this vision is very specific. It tells me this specific thing. So
4 and 10?
4 and 10? Yeah, let's do 4 and 10. Cool. Oh gosh, where is it? 4. Fourth place, lower midheaven. And the midheaven is the name given to the 10th pretty typically. So Yeah, if benefics rule the ascendant or fortune and are in this place, the native will make his living in temples. It also pertains to revelations by the gods and through vision of ghostly shapes. That's really interesting. I've never actually looked at this very closely, and so that's really cool because what he's basically implying here is that because the fourth house is naturally in a sense, like the most hidden place in the chart because it's where the it's sort of like it's the midnight point, right? And astronomically, it refers to midnight to 6 a.m., especially around 3 a.m. That is the point where the veil is the thinnest and that you're producing the most melatonin naturally in the pineal gland. And so that's why monks will wake up to meditate at like 4 in the morning, 4 in the morning, because it's the easiest time to meditate and to pierce the veil and to sort of flirt with the subtle realms that you encounter when you go to sleep or when you are dying. So he's giving a rather mystical psychic association to the fourth house, and because the fourth house is a private place, it is, it is the ground we stand on, right? It is associated with like our home physically and psychologically, our bedroom, the most private place where we can be ourselves in private because of where it is in the scheme of things astronomically. And so it does have kind of this psychic vibe to it. Like making a living in temples is interesting and that makes sense because if you're living in a temple, you're hidden from the rest of the world. Most people live in a temple. Okay. That's just funny to me. Sorry. Visions of ghostly shapes and stuff. Well, again, this is actually, even though the Hellenistics don't always relate the natural zodiac to the houses, you sometimes see it coming through. This is a very Cancerian thing. Cancer is notoriously very psychic sign, and it's the fourth sign. It's very private and it's very emotional and so on. So the fourth house naturally carries some of these significations, and other things it refers to in Hellenistic astrology are both parents or the father individually, hidden or buried things that are buried below the ground, inheritances, property, like wealth that you possess that can't be moved, so like land or a building, and that's the main thing. In Jyotish, it refers to the mother, and I personally think that makes more sense, so I use that. I don't use the father, so I use the mother for the fourth. But anyway, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, I think fourth house is one of the most personal houses that we can see, and fourth house is the house of mother, as you said. It is the house of nourishment, and that's the first thing that we need after we are born. And mother is the first. Mother is probably the only person who can give us the nourishment that we need as a baby. And fourth house is the house of good comforts, and from Vedic astrology point of view,
luxury too.
Yeah, luxury too. Fourth house rules the house of fourth house rules vehicles and luxury vehicles.
I want to say something about that real quick. I think the reason that is in Vedic astrology is because if you think about the ancient world, it would have been a luxury to own a vehicle.
Yes,
exactly. An elephant or a horse or a chariot. And so in today's world, I personally don't think it makes as much sense, although it still works. It still works well to use the fourth house as vehicles, but it's more like in America, everyone owns a car, so it's not a luxury anymore. It's just part of our lifestyle here. So
the differentiation is that if you have a prominent Venus in your fourth house, you can have a Benz or Audi or something like that.
Right, like a Rolls Royce.
Yeah, Rolls Royce. Yeah, Benz or Audi is probably less, but maybe Rolls Royce or...
and if you live in a city, if you're reading the chart of a person who lives in New York City, it's a luxury to own a car in New York City. So you might want to use the fourth house for that.
Yeah. So, and fourth house, Venus has Digbala in fourth house, which is the directional strength from Vedic point of view.
Right.
And Yeah, and as it is, Venus also rules comforts which are not basic comforts, because basic comforts, I think Moon rules basic comforts, while
Yeah.
Venus rules some kind of comforts that are just better than basic, or higher than
Yes.
basic.
Specific pleasures or
Yeah,
that comfort. Like I love I love this one flavor of ice cream, and I always like to have that flavor on Fridays.
yeah, cool.
Or
Yeah,
something.
I think
I don't do that, but I just mean
as simple as that, yes.
yeah.
And exactly opposite, the 10th house is the public house of it's the public house, and fourth house is the most personal house. And public house again holds it is the house of authority, and it confers the respect, or indicates the respect that we are going to kind
The
of
10th
get.
house.
Yeah, 10th house,
Yeah.
the public
Yeah.
respect, public
Right.
respect.
Right. So we have public versus private, and
Exactly.
before we move on to the 10th house too, like we see here too, this place implies reputation after death and so on. The fourth house also has to do with death because it has to do with burial, and it also has to do with the end of the matter. Like the end of anything can be referred to by the fourth house because it's the final place in the sun's journey, beginning at the ascendant and moving midheaven and then descendant. It's like sort of the final place it comes to. So it's sort of the end of any and all matters. And some techniques of death involve utilizing the fourth house. And on a side note, there was one text I read once where it said, what people say about a person after he is dead is shown by the fifth house, which comes after the fourth house. So after he's dead and buried, what are people saying about him? So that's kind of an interesting one that I've never really messed around with, but I always keep it in mind. So yeah, let's go to the 10th place. The midheaven, yeah. So both benefics and malefics rejoice in this place if they have been assigned the rulership of the lot of fortune or the ascendant, or the lot of daimon, which is also called the lot of spirit. If any of the benefics are in it when rising, or they have contact with the moon, tyrants and kings are born, governors of districts, men known by name, many places. If the ruler of this place is situated favorably, it makes vigorous, successful men. If situated unfavorably, it makes feeble, unsuccessful men. If the ruler is setting and a malefic is in conjunction or in opposition to this place, it makes failures, as well as sterile or childless men. So this place, from this short paragraph, I read the whole thing because we get this idea that this is about working hard, fulfilling responsibilities, actions in the world that bring us reputation or that don't bring us reputation if things are unfavorable. But I like that he says that both benefics and malefics are, generally speaking, good in this place, because it's in Jyotish it's called karma bhava, which means basically it's related to our actions and fulfilling our responsibilities through our actions. And so as a result, this is a house where it's almost like if you put in, it's like showing whatever planet's there, if you put in the work, right, you can reap some kind of benefit from that planet. So it's a place where, our actions are kind of up to us in a sense. And so our actions are going to bring us fame and repute or not, regardless of what's there or not there. And the 10th house is naturally the first house again, because it's 10, 1 and 0, right?
Yeah.
So the 10th house is actually very important for understanding the first house more fully, because the 10th house, the first house is like what we are, but the 10th house is kind of like what we have to do or what's being exerted upon us from a higher sphere, so that's why it has to do with our responsibilities and whatnot. And it also naturally refers to matters pertaining to profession, career, jobs, our boss, if we have, that kind of a job where we've got a boss or a superior. And it's a very, very powerful house, especially if the midheaven is there, because then the midheaven makes it all the more powerful. And it just primarily it just deals with our actions. A good Greek word is praxis, which I would recommend people to look up because it's hard to explain. But praxis is what I think of for the 10th house.
Cool.
And that's contrast to the fourth house, like we were saying. You've got your public life, you've got your responsibilities related to the society versus your private life in the fourth house, what you have to do to feel comfortable and good and peaceful and so on. So they complement one another. Take it away, Aswin. Oh, I can't hear you.
It's okay?
Oh, now I can hear you. Yeah. Okay.
So the basic differentiation is the house of private stuff and the house of public stuff, where and 10th house is more of Rahuic in terms of understanding that it puts us in a public spectrum or a public space, while the fourth house is kind of a Ketu spectrum where we are kind of within ourselves and kind of things. So it's I don't know how many people agree with it, but I think that is my way of understanding the fourth and 10th house, because it kind of fits very well with the notes.
Yeah, and we have to again understand astronomically that the sun is culminating at noon, where the midheaven is, which is the sort of archetypal 10th house, right? So that's where the sun's culminating, and where it's anti-culminating when it's the apex of nighttime, right, at midnight. That's the fourth house, at least theoretically. You know, they don't always fall there, but so it's important to understand that astronomical idea, because that gives us a lot of insight. And you know, when the sun is at its highest point in the sky in its arc, or whatever, highest point of its arc, it you know, that's the glory. You know, that's the supreme achievement, so to speak.
Okay. Yeah.
So
cool.
10th house has a lot to do with our destiny as well, like what we're aiming for. I think more the midheaven than the 10th house, and that's why it's important to pay attention to where the midheaven falls, because sometimes it falls in the 9th or the 11th house, and then the 10th house, the 10th whole sign house, may not be as emphasized. It may just be more about like our work and our job and those kinds of things, but the midheaven becomes the key point to understanding like what we're sort of destined for, like what we're looking at in a distance. At a distance, we're seeing that sun in the distance and we're striving towards it, you know.
Sure.
So that's very midheaven kind of thing. Okay, did you want to move on?
5 and 11.
5 and 11. Okay. So many theorems, but it's the place of good fortune and the joy of Venus, as we looked at in that chart. The 5th house primarily has to do with children, so anything related to children. And in my experience, it also has to do with joy, not so much leisure or not so much leisure and like entertainments, but joy. So like passion, like anything. So like your day job, maybe you're an insurance salesman, but then if you're like Charles Ives, you passionately compose lots of crazy music at night. And, you know, so it's something that you're passionate about. And Venus is about passion too. So it fits very well. And the 5th house also tends to have to do with risk, risk-taking, creativity, self-expression, things like gambling. But let's see what Valens says. If benefics hold the ascendant or the lot of fortune and are in this place, the native will be great, will lead the masses, and will make laws for them. Okay, very, very much again about like creativity and risk. You know, a person who can just like be confident and do those things is going to be powerful. And then he talks about Venus there and stuff. If Mars happens to be here, men will be rulers of all sorts of places, governors, tyrants, and masters over life and death. Saturn, men will be masters of estates, flocks, and herds. If the sun is here, men will be friends of great lords and associates with kings. Mercury will do success through words worthy of money, and Moon will make the native long live, growing old in prosperity. The benefics help greatly while passing through this place. The malefics cannot do harm. This is a bit of an overstatement, but the idea is that the 5th and 11th houses are both so auspicious for the Hellenistic authors so supportive to the ascendant by trine and sextile that whatever is there brings a measure of good fortune. So that's why Mars brings some sort of military power and leadership, or mastery of the sword, right? Mastery over life and death is like a samurai or something like that. Saturn in this place will bring estates and flocks and herds, towns and villages. Saturn naturally signifies like farming and property and, just kind of the things that he lists here, like sort of earthy kind of stuff that you can have wealth from, like flocks and herds. So if Saturn is here, a person can have these kinds of things. And this isn't to say that malefics or benefics here won't create, hindrances or help, but it is to say that no matter what's here, the Hellenistic authors considered it so auspicious that it would bring something good. Now if you've got a debilitated Saturn in the fifth in Aries, right, you're gonna have, there's gonna be problems around children, absolutely. But you have to assess everything to see if there's a silver lining even in such a debilitated position. So what did you want to say about it?
Fifth house is also the house of creativity and probably, and I think you also said gambling and speculations. So my banking brain comes here, and I've seen it work. Like fifth house or the fifth lord plays a lot when it comes to gambling and speculation, and
Cool.
creativity is there. So if the fifth lord is placed in a good dignity, these people are naturally creative and they have a good grasp over creative stuff and creative ideas. So I think creativity is not listed here directly, but still it should be there hidden somewhere.
It's kind of implied,
Yeah,
again,
it's implied.
These overviews of the houses that Valens gives here, you have to read between the lines, and he doesn't give the typical associations that we often find just listed right off the bat. But if for people who are interested in that, like other texts where you'll find more about the houses Hellenistically will be Firmicus Maternus, Rhetorius, and Dorotheus. But Firmicus very briefly does list what each house means toward the beginning of his text, which is also free online. So that's a good place to go as well. Let's go to the 11th house, the place of the good daimon. So if benefics are in the sign of the good daimon, located in their proper places, blah, 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 they make men illustrious and rich from youth, even more so if they are in a trine to the lot of fortune or sextile with the ascendant, which they would have to be if they were in the 11th house, actually, but that's whatever. So we'll see down below, if malefics are in conjunction with the good daimon, they cannot do any evil. So this could mean that if the malefics are in that house, but it may also mean that if the malefics are with the planet ruling that house. Again, the 11th house is actually considered the most auspicious house for the Hellenistic authors. It's the best house without a doubt from their perspective. Yeah. Which is different from Indian astrology, which is quite funny actually. But yes, the 11th, because it's the joy of Jupiter, the greater benefic, because it is the place of the good daimon, which means that it is guiding us towards the truth and the wisdom and blah, blah, blah. And it's basically like it's gains and it's friends. And so it's those great things that come our way that support us just because of our own auspicious actions and faith in God, so to speak, So the 11th brings us these things, whereas the 5th, we get these things as more of a result, or you could say that the 11th yields as a result of our first 5th house kind of nature. Like we do creative risk-taking things in the 5th, and then as a result in the 11th, we get some kind of return based upon those for just being faithful and who we are and doing quote unquote good things. But it's a very supportive house. Real friends are very supportive. Real friends are even oftentimes more supportive than family. And so, you know, it's just overall like a really auspicious house. It is most efficacious if the house rulers of the lot of fortune, the ascendant, and the good daimon happen to be rising, or if most stars are in conjunction or in aspect with these inoperative signs, they will make men glorious and extremely wealthy. You know, if Jupiter's here, the native will be fortunate, possessed of good income, and have many children, because Jupiter will aspect the fifth house of children. If it is also the ruler of the lot of fortune, the native will be rich and blessed. If Mercury is here in conjunction, the native will be an imperial steward and happy with children. And it's just basically a lot of good, nice things that sort of happen because of this house. So
yeah, and the one thing that 11th house does is, in Vedic astrology, it's 11th house is the house of elder siblings, and 11th house also is capable of killing the native. So
killing the native?
Yeah, 11th house is a Maraka house.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a whole nother story. I really don't even know how to think of that, because for Hellenistics, it's so good. It's just like, it's like pure butter and honey or something like that, you know? I guess if you ate too much butter and honey, though, you could die from sugar.
No, and try to use 11th house as a Maraka house, and you'll see, at least in my case, I've seen at least 75% or 80% of people will have the 11th house or 11th lord influence during death. So
Wow, that's so strange.
It will be a profound thing which even I had trouble like handling, but still my grandfather has a database of 200 to 250 horoscopes, and out of which he has ticked at around 178 or 179 horoscopes that kind of died or faced death related scenarios when they had 11th lord's time period or something like that.
Wow. Okay. Well,
not everyone died, but everyone is. They are all early 20th century people of my family, and
yeah. Well, I think from an Indian perspective, that might come from the fact that the 11th is the 6th house from the 6th house, and the 12th house from the 12th house. So it kind of becomes, on that level, honorarily malefic. But it just wasn't conceived this way for the Hellenistic astrologers.
But still, 11th house is considered as a positive house as well.
It is, yeah. For Indian astrology, yeah, that's true. It's kind of like your greatest, most highest desire too. That's a good way to look at it. Like the desire that leads you forward when all other desires sort of fail. You know, the most universal kind of impersonal desire you have to, like, you know, make the world a better place or something like that. You know, it's like you have your basic desires for like a spouse, 7th house, or your basic desires for just having fun, 3rd house. But then you have your grand ultimate desire in the 11th. Like, I just really want to land on the moon, or I really want to climb Mount Everest or something like that, you know? So it's like your ultimate desire. Okay, so then we're finally getting to the 6th house and the 12th house, the last houses that we need to talk about. And so the 6th house is the place of Mars and bad fortune. 6th house, generally speaking, has to do with slavery, with small animals, which are kind of like slaves, especially if you're a farmer, with enemies, people who are trying to harm you, and with illnesses, which is basically the result of your body kind of, you know, having to like readjust itself in a certain situation. So we're not going to get too deep into the psychological and philosophical aspects of these houses in this video because we're running out of time. But let's just read what Valens has to say about the 6th place a little bit. If benefics happen to be in this place, the native will lose whatever he possesses. His property will not stay with him. He will suffer loss when he's advanced in age. The sun here, ruling fortune or the ascendant, causes the native to be condemned by the highest authority. You know, and we're just going to see as you read this that it's, you know, it's just difficult stuff. Mercury here, ruling the lot or the ascendant makes plotters and thieves, right? Mars will cause wounds and disease. Jupiter will lose property. Venus will have trials and penalties because of women. Saturn will be a wanderer prone to give offense and will flee his homeland. The moon here person will be a slave, helpless, and so on. So it is a house very much of hardship. It's definitely a house of hardship, and it's definitely a house of, I think, it's a very rebellious house too. People with sixth house placements are very rebellious individuals that get themselves into trouble, which is not good or bad. That's how it is. Parashara calls it. I don't remember the Sanskrit, but Parashara calls it the rogue bhava. Roguish.
Roga.
I love that. Roguish behavior, right?
No, Roga bhava is again disease. It's disease. It relates to disease.
Yes, but one translation of it is like the rogue house in English, and so
that's the okay. You mean the English term? Okay.
Yeah, the English term, the rogue, and so
it's also the house of loan and debts, and there is one another interesting thing that I read somewhere, like sixth house denotes or indicates agricultural lands. So that is one.
That makes sense. Sure.
Yes, I follow that, and people tend to get into that kind of stuff if they have a profound sixth house or something like that.
But yeah, the sixth house being the house of Mars, Mars is a rebel. Mars is a troublemaker sometimes. So Mars will strike out on its own. But it's also a house that tends to bring things like ascetic practices and intense disciplines and stuff like that, self-improvement. And, people with strong sixth house placements can get into situations where they feel oppressed and they feel like slaves too. It's not just about your actual slaves. It can bring a situation that's like slavery, So wherever it is placed, you'll know something more about the diseases that the person may suffer from throughout their life. Just kind of like the basic types of sicknesses or accidents. It's also having to do with accidents. And so opposite the 12th, the sixth house is it's a bit more of a personal house. So it's a bit more about like personal problems and crises and afflictions, whereas the 12th, as we'll see in a moment, is more impersonal. It's more like being put into prison and stuff like that. You get into situations where you're not just trying to nurse your broken leg. Now they've tied your leg to a a rock in some prison somewhere. A ball and chain, so that
somewhere near the Shutter Island or something like that.
Yeah. So the 12th house is what comes before birth. It's unconsciousness, right? It's the last house in the scheme of the order of houses, and so it's whereas the first house is life and individuality. The 12th house is what comes before life and individuality, right? What takes us away from life and individuality, expenditure, right? Loss of things, imprisonment. It also has to do with like sadness and woes and secrets and things like this. So go ahead.
It is the house of uncertainty and it's the house of hurdles. But to talk from positive point of view, I think 12th house is the house of inner and deep spirituality, and 12th house is the house of foreign lands. Foreign lands was initially but during the ancient times it was considered tough because moving to foreign land was a very tedious job, and people die.
You're out of your element. You're really out of your element there.
Yeah, people kind of die just traveling somewhere, and that was one of the most difficult things, and it was associated with the 12th house. But today, some of the facets of the 12th house are kind of blessing. Like if you want to move into a very developed country or something like that, you can choose to move. And
the 12th house is the 12th and 8th are great for spiritual pursuits. which is a topic for another time, of course. And even the 6th too can be helpful for spiritual pursuits. But let's read what Valens says about the place of the bad daimon, which again is that sort of devil on your shoulder that takes you away from like right action and things that bring good for not just yourself, but for all people involved. So if the malefics happen to be in this place, they will cause great wounds and traumas. If a lot of fortune is present in this place and some star rules it, well, I don't know what that means because some star has to rule it. But whatever, it's a weird, translation or whatever. There will be no help, not even during transits. They have become enemies from the beginning, from the moment of birth. In the same way, benefics found in this place will not bestow their benefits. Whenever these 3 stars fall in this sign, the rulers of the ascendant, the lot, or the lot of daimon, the lot of spirit, they make men unfortunate and disgraced. Those lacking their daily bread, many will hold out their hands for alms. Well, just a FYI, I'll share my own experience with this. I have the lot of fortune conjunct the south node in the 12th house. Oh. And I've had plenty of misfortunes in my life, but I cannot say that my life has been like this horrible, terrible thing. And I've been like living on the street or, obviously I'm talking to you here using a MacBook Pro, using a web camera, a mic, I'm not, and I'm not, I'm not that old. So maybe later in my life, this will make more sense. But my point is that the older authors teach more with extremes and with allegories and metaphors than they do literally. Many of the things they say will sometimes be literally true. When you find them in modern day people's charts, you'll find, wow, that really happened. But it's important to understand that they are teaching, this is like a textbook. If you were able to talk to them in person, they would probably elaborate on this stuff. It wouldn't be so black and white. But the point is that we get the vibe from this house that it is the most challenging house in the whole chart for the Hellenistic authors. And so that's really the thing to take away from this. Whenever you find planets in the 12th house, it's going to be at 12th and 6th, right? It's going to be opposite of 11th and 5th, where the 11th and 5th will bring good things even when there are challenges. The 12th and 6th will bring this kind of monkey's paw situation where even when they bring quote unquote good things from a worldly perspective, there's lots of challenges and attendant difficulties there. So I've often seen that even like 12th house will bring it'll show phobias and it'll show any way you get in your own way. Like it's also the house of hidden enemies, people working behind your back, versus the 6th house of more open enemies, people are working against you. So the 12th house is like the spy from the other side that you think is your best friend and then betrays you in the end. And I've even seen one chart had exalted Jupiter in the 12th house, and the ascendant was Leo. Yeah. And so exalted Jupiter in the 12th house. And there was like a moon in Scorpio, so kind of an afflicted moon, but the person, they didn't get themselves into huge trouble, but they would do a lot of like drinking and drugs when they would party with their friends. They weren't a drug addict, but they would casually do things like drop acid or like get really, really drunk at parties frequently. And so you find Jupiter being like too much, in intemperance, Jupiter in Cancer consuming mind-altering substances and whatnot, alcohol. So it's not to say that Jupiter won't bring any good things in that chart, because the person actually was like, had sort of a Jupiter side to them that was like more spiritual, you could say, but they also had a tendency to, get into these situations. So I think that's all I got to say about it.
Sure. Great. So I think we made a very comprehensive analysis and explanation of which is pretty much like the previous one that we did with the planets. So it's almost close to that. We are almost close to 2 hours or something like that. So, and good. So
cool.
We'll see,
All right.
and we'll get back with the next topic. I don't know. We are kind of we have so much to deal with, and we are kind of still planning what and how to do next. So anyway, we'll catch up soon, and I'm sure next one will also be a very comprehensive video.
Yeah, probably, right?
Yeah, like this. So see you next time.
All right. See you, man.
Thanks.
Thanks.